Benefits of Online Vocabulary Acquisition Tools in First-Year Spanish Students by Nathan Demersky, MAE 616, May 2018. So for my study, my research question was, what happens to first-year Spanish students' targeted vocabulary use in brief oral conversations when they predominantly use online vocabulary practice tools? My sub-question was, what happens to frequency of use of the targeted vocabulary when students predominantly use online vocabulary practice tools? So, why did I choose this study? Well, the main reason was because I've always been curious about the difference between traditional vocabulary practice tools like flashcards or vocabulary lists versus what's available now online to help second language learners learn and remember targeted or key vocabulary. There's always been such a big difference between the students that really understand and really learn the vocabulary quickly using whatever their preferred study methods are, and the students that struggle. So I thought about, well, what I'd like to find out more about is, will there be a difference if a particular group of students predominantly use online vocabulary practice tools versus the more traditional methods? I can see daily in my classroom how technology is something that interests my students, how they get excited when they see the Chromebook card or they see computers and they know they're going to be able to use something online, and tapping into the natural curiosity, the natural interest that this generation of students has for technology seemed like a logical choice when deciding on a research topic. Our students nowadays are very at ease using technology. They do it well. They all have a general understanding of how computers work, so using that as a strategy just seemed like a logical choice. So for a little information about my data collection strategies and the setting and participants of my study. To begin with, let's talk about setting and participants. I selected a group of 6 first-year, 7th grade Spanish students who had little or no previous exposure to Spanish in the past. I chose 3 female and 3 male students. For my data collection strategies, what I used were student interviews that took place on a weekly basis. I looked at the online results of the intervention called conjuguemos.com. When the students in my test group used this intervention, I was able to access online results during their practice sessions and collect the data that way. I also used in-class teacher observations and a final presentation, which was an oral conversation with me using the LOTI speaking rubric, which I will explain further during my presentation, and this stands for Languages Other Than English. So for some information about the results and findings of my study, at the end of my study I did conclude that first-year Spanish students do appear to benefit from the use of online vocabulary practice tools, and the use of these tools can increase targeted vocabulary word frequency as well. My data collection strategies of the weekly student interviews, the online results using the intervention, my observations made in class during in-class activities, as well as short conversations with me during class for practice, and then the results of the final conversation using the LOTI rubric pointed me in this direction. So the results of the weekly student interviews were really interesting because I got a chance to kind of talk to the kids and ask them how they were doing with the practice, what they liked about the intervention. There's so many different aspects to it that they kind of had some choice as to the tools that they used. And during these conversations, I took some of the quotes from our actual interviews and used those in the data collection process. Many of the students were very positive about the intervention. A few quotes are, as you can see here. I would ask them something like, how is the tool working for you? And they'd say, it's working for me because I can visualize the answers. And then another student responding to the same question said, yes, it's beneficial to me. It makes me use all of the words. Another student said, yes, because it gets repetitive, and if I see it enough, it will never leave my brain. I loved using it and will continue using it. This is one of my favorite quotes from the study. And another student said, yes, I like improve my scores. I try to improve, get the same scores or higher. Like if I get the same scores, I need to work on them more. But if I get higher scores, it makes me feel better. I love it. I will do this every week now. I thought these were very indicative of the overall positive reaction to using the online vocabulary practice. So this slide shows the actual low-T languages other than English speaking rubric. This is the one that I used during the final conversations where my students scored very high, the ones that were in my case study. As you can see, there are 3 categories, one for fluency, one for pronunciation, one for language use, and it was this rubric that I used to grade their final conversations. They were assigned points. Obviously it was a 15-point assignment, and they could score high across the 3 categories, which would earn them 15 points. 15 was the maximum. They could score mid-high, mid-low, or low, and obviously none of them scored mid, low, or low. So after I collected my data, I was able to make 3 assertions. Assertion number 1 was my students were better able to memorize and understand the target vocabulary after using the intervention. The next slide will go into this in more detail. So this bar graph represents the pre and post test vocabulary results for my case study. This is to talk more about assertion number 1. And as you can see on the bottom, we have the 6 students represented by initials, and the score on the left, which is their pre-test percentage correct. They were given a vocabulary list with all of the words that they would be practicing and memorizing for the purposes of this unit. And across the board, you can see the results from left to right show that the first vocabulary test results were extremely low, and the growth measured by using the intervention, the score on the right, the bar graph on the right, shows a tremendous amount of growth. Assertion number 2 was my students are becoming more confident using the target vocabulary during brief oral conversations after using the intervention. Confidence is clearly a very important thing, especially when learning a second language, so the next slide will show some more results that'll speak to this assertion. So this slide shows the average Conjuguemos.com score, or the percentage correct when using this intervention. This intervention is an extremely strict program where students will see a phrase or a word in English and be required to produce it in Spanish using correct spelling, actually perfect spelling, and placement of accent marks as well. And the percentages for the overall scores, which I combined all together to bring out the average, shows pretty high results for 4 out of the 6 in the upper 80%, with only 2 students and a little bit lower in the 61 to 68% range. This kind of shows me that despite the program being extremely strict on spelling, that my students were able to succeed in their individual practice attempts. My third assertion was my students are using the target vocabulary more frequently during brief oral conversations after using the intervention, and the next slide will show a little more about this assertion. So this graph represents the languages other than English speaking rubric results, which was based on the 15-point conversation we had at the end of the unit. It was a conversation one-on-one between myself and the students regarding la familia, or for their family. There was 15 points available, and as you can see, in 3 of the 6, they scored a perfect score of 15 out of 15, with the lowest score being a 12 out of 15, which is still an 80%, a very high score. The conversations that we had were amazing. The kids did a great job. They were able to use the vocabulary. They seemed confident. They really did a great job with this final conversation. I was very pleased to see these results. So for my reflection and impact slide here, I did take a lot from this study. I believe that tapping into students' natural interest in using technology, computers, in second language classrooms is extremely important. There's absolutely no reason in the world not to use technology when it's available, because it is something that the kids enjoy using and that they're familiar with and comfortable with and they're good at. I plan to, whenever possible, use technology as an option for either study or exploration of the Spanish language, and to really encourage the kids to use that, especially the ones that particularly want to use it. The impact on my teaching will be, clearly, I will gain more student involvement, more student interest. If they're allowed to use something that they like and it still produces results like I'm seeing, it just seems logical that it would be beneficial to my classroom. So the limitations, there were unfortunately a few limitations to this study. One of them being the time. I feel like I could have gotten maybe a little more data if I'd had a chance to have the study be a little bit longer in duration. I also believe that there are some aspects of using the intervention for the data collection points in particular that could be improved a bit. When the students were using the intervention at home, they were not supposed to be using a vocabulary list or any other sort of tool to help them during the practice using CodeWorkGambles.com, and obviously there's really no way for me to know for sure if that's the case. They could have been reading off their list, they could have been using something, a translation device of some kind to help them get the answers correct. You'd have to take the student words for that. They all claim that they didn't do that, and I actually believe them, but that would be a limitation, something to think about for the future. The results of the final conversation lead me to believe that this is not the case, because when they were speaking with me and I was using the LOTI rubric to gauge their conversation, they had no outside help with that. That was all coming straight from their heads, so clearly something that they had practiced before. So the future implications of this study for me personally, I think, kind of ties directly back into my reflection slide as well, where I will be extremely cognizant and understand that technology is not something that we should be fighting. We should be encouraging. We should be using this amazing tool as much as possible in the classroom, not just for the entertainment value, which comes with some of these online practice tools that can kind of appear as video games, even though they are actually teaching something and the students are practicing something, even though they may think they're just playing a game. Just by tapping into their natural curiosity and their ability to use technology and making a choice, giving the students choice is so important in the educational field. Instead of just telling them what they're going to be using to practice vocabulary, giving them choices and saying, look, this is an option, check it out, see what you think, and then if it's something you want to use, you should use it. It's just important to have that buy-in to get a cooperative learning environment going together where the students really feel like they're a part of the decision-making process. I would encourage any teacher in any subject to do the same thing, to take the time to look into what's out there, what's available technology-wise, and find a way to incorporate it into a lesson, into a practice activity, some way, into the classroom. I know that I will be extremely curious to see what's out there and make myself a little bit more of an expert when it comes to using technology. If you don't understand the program, it's not going to be very useful in your classroom. So doing your research and making sure that you, as the teacher, understand what this tool is capable of and how to use it is really important as well. So not just getting the students interested in it, but having teachers be interested as well. Thank you very much for watching my presentation, and that's it.